Before installation, be sure to check your entire parts list. You should have 2 adjustable rebuildable lower ball joints, 2 upper ball joints, 1 hardware kit, and 1 ball joint adjuster wrench. Park the truck on a flat level surface. Chalk the rear wheels, make sure the vehicle is in park or in gear, and set the parking brake. Raise the front end, place the front axle housing on jack stands and remove the front wheels. Or, safely raise the vehicle on a lift. Unhook the ABS sensor lines from the flexible brake lines. Remove the brake calipers from the knuckles, and hang them from the frame with caliper hangers or straps of some sort. Do not allow the calipers to hang by the brake lines. Remove the brake rotors. Remove the ABS sensor by unscrewing the 5mm Allen head bolt and then pulling the sensor carefully up and out. Remove the tie rod from the steering knuckles and hang it out of the way. Remove the wheel bearing bolts from the back side of the steering knuckle. It can be helpful to rotate the axle shafts to orient the U-joint so that you have access to the bolt heads. With the wheel bearing bolts removed, remove the wheel bearing unit assembly and the axle shaft as one piece. Carefully knock the assembly loose from the knuckle with a soft mallet. Pull the axle shaft out and through the knuckle. Be careful not to damage the splines on the inside of the axle shaft. Loosen the nuts in the old ball joints. Knock the knuckles loose by either striking the knuckle with a ball peen hammer or using an air hammer. Remove the nuts and the knuckle. Remove the C-clip from the lower ball joints. Remove dust boots from all the ball joints and wipe up all the grease. Now you can press out the old ball joints. The lower ball joints are pressed out, down, and the uppers are pressed out, up. Inspect the knuckle tapers and inner C bores. Ensure they are not deformed and are clean and free of burrs. Remove the dust boots from the Synergy ball joints prior to installation. Depending on the wheel offset, axle trusses and gussets, axle shaft size, and other factors, the orientation of the Zerk will need to be decided by the installer. We recommend orienting the Zerk fitting so that it is pointing towards the front of the vehicle, slightly towards center. Once the lower ball joints are correctly oriented, press the joint into the axle housing. The lower ball joint should be pressed and assembled. It is critical that the body is pressed in evenly and smoothly. Grease is not necessary, but can be used if desired. The joint must sit flat and flush against the lower surface of the inner C. Now you may press the upper ball joints into the axle housing. Like the lowers, it is critical that the body is pressed in evenly and smoothly. Grease is not necessary, but it can be used if desired. The joint must sit flat and flush against the upper surface of the inner C. Bend out the locking tabs that interface with the cap out so that the cap may be rotated. Install the Zerk fittings and dust boots on the ball joints. Next, install the C-clip on the lower ball joints. Note the orientation of the cotter pin holes in the ball joint pins. We recommend aligning the cotter pin holes so they are perpendicular to the axle, aligned front to back on the vehicle. Reinstall the steering knuckles. Tighten the lower ball joint nut slightly, no more than 50 pounds per foot. Reinstall the ABS line clips under the upper ball joint nut, and torque the upper ball joint castle nuts to 70 pounds a foot. Now you may torque the lower ball joint castle nuts to 150 pounds per foot. Rotate the knuckles from lock to lock by hand. They should be stiff, but able to rotate. Ensure there are no clearance issues anywhere. Potential problems may arise with worn knuckles. The lower ball joint taper could sit too deep in the knuckle and cause the knuckle to interfere with the ball joint or inner C. If this is the case, the vehicle will need new knuckles. Install cotter pins. If the castle nut slots do not line up with the cotter pin holes, continue to tighten the castle nuts until they align. Never loosen a castle nut to align the cotter pin. If the cotter pin hole is above the top of the castle nut, remove the castle nut and place a washer under the castle nut to make sure the pin engages with the nut. Usually this is an indication that the knuckle taper has been worn out and the knuckles should be replaced. Set preload on the lower ball joints. With the tabs bent out of the way, slowly turn the cap clockwise using the provided adjuster tool and a 1/4 inch drive torque wrench. Tighten the joints until 120 pounds per inch, or 10 pounds per foot, is shown on the torque wrench. Our adjustment torque spec is the torque at the wrench, not at the joint. It is important that the torque wrench is oriented perpendicular to the joint. Once the torque spec is achieved, bend the tabs from the lock ring to engage with the cap. We recommend at least 2 tabs bent into the cap. Only bend up locking tabs that are accessible so that the joint may be adjusted again in the future. If the tabs do not align with slots on the cap, be sure to tighten the cap in order to make them align. Reinstall the unit bearing, hub, axle shaft assembly, being very careful when installing the axle shaft to ensure the splines line up in the differential and not to damage the inner axle seals. Torque unit bearing hub bolts to 150 pounds per foot. Reinstall the ABS sensors. Reinstall the tie rod. Torque OEM hardware to factory spec 40 pounds per foot, then an additional 90 degrees. This ram is using our Synergy tie rod. Torque the castle nut to 70 pounds per foot. Reinstall the brake rotors and calipers. Tighten caliper mounting bolts to 130 pounds per foot. The joints come pre-greased. If you're going to grease them after installation, use no more than 1 pump of grease from a grease gun. We recommend Synergy Lithium Complex Extreme Pressure Grease. If this is not available, be sure to use an extreme pressure grease designed for metal on metal joints. Reinstall wheels and tires and torque lug nuts. Congratulations, your installation is complete.